Once upon a time, there was a certain king who was greatly pained by the reality that he didn't have an heir to take over his throne after he left this world. So he issued a proclamation to all of the young men in his kingdom. If any of you find yourselves to be worthy, and what does it mean to be worthy? If you see that you care about your fellow man, your fellow citizen as much as yourself, even more than yourself, I hereby say that you may come and have an interview for the position of future king. As you could imagine, all the young men in the kingdom were very excited about this. There was one young man who was very poor, and he thought to himself, although he felt worthy, that he had the right characteristics, he didn't feel like he was presentable to go to the mansion, to the palace of the king, and to stand before the great and exalted king. So he put in overtime, and for a few weeks he worked his tail off in order to make extra money so that he could have the provisions needed for the journey to the palace and for the proper clothes to be presentable before the king. And off he went. Finally, after a long journey, he came to the outskirts of the king's palace, and he was very excited about the interview that, God willing, he would soon have. And all of a sudden, as he was walking by, he saw an old man in tattered clothing on the side of the road, obviously a homeless man. And as he walked by him, the young lad felt such pain for the circumstance of this man. And so, even though it was a great self-sacrifice, he took what food he had left for the journey back, and he gave it to this old man. And he took the clothing off of his own body in order to give it to this old man. He thought to himself, how can I go to the king now looking like this? Nevertheless, he said, I've come this far. Even though I'll be in my old tattered clothing, nevertheless, let me give it a shot. And so he came to the palace, and they gave him his number, and eventually it was time for him to enter for his interview. And he came and he sat down, and behind him he heard as the door opened, and he quickly jumped to a stand as the king made his way into the room. As soon as the young man's eyes fixed upon the king, he was in shock. It was none other than the beggar that he had seen on the outskirts of the palace on his way in that was standing before him. I don't understand, the young man said. The king explained to him, how better for me to know if a young man was truly worthy, if he truly cared about someone as much, if not more than himself, than by devising such a test. And he says, and you passed with flying colors. You see, my dear friends, God is not just some abstract entity. God is to be found in every single individual, in every single creature. At the end of our 120 years in this world, we too will meet the King. Whether we are embraced and brought into the royal palace to be a part, to be close to the King, is decided by how we treat the King. But treat the King, as we just said, treat God, as we just said, is not just our relationship with that abstract entity, for he is found in every single creature, in every single creation. When we eventually meet our Maker, we will not just meet that abstract entity that we often think of when we think of God, when we think of the King. We will meet every single person that we've ever encountered, every single animal, every single thing in creation that we've ever encountered. And by virtue of extending a helping hand to all of them, by virtue of showing appreciation, gratitude, and a kind face to all of them, eventually, when we meet the King, that King will reflect all of those faces and all of that thanks right back to us. Bezrat Hashem, we should all be meritorious to have just that occur.